The evening shadows stretched long across Willow Creek's main street as 8-year-old Lily Parker clutched her small bag of groceries. The peaceful rhythm of her footsteps alongside Max, her German shepherd, shattered when the first rumble of motorcycles echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Before Lily could react, 5 bikers materialized from around the corner, their engines snarling like predators. The lead rider, a man with a jagged scar cutting across his stubbled face, spotted her and smirked. A cold knot of fear formed in Lily's stomach as she froze in place. Well, what do we have here?" The man called out, signaling his companions to circle around the little girl and her dog. The Black Rapers gang had been terrorizing Willow Creek for months, but they'd never targeted a child before. They were unaware that when Max lowered his head and stepped forward with teeth bared, this wasn't just a family pet's protective instinct. As one biker reached toward Lily, Max's eyes locked onto the threat with the calculated precision that came from years of professional K-9 training. What happened next would change Willow Creek forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 8-year-old Lily Parker wasn't like other children in Willow Creek. Born with mild autism spectrum disorder, she experienced the world differently, sometimes overwhelmed by sounds and sensations that others barely noticed, but yet remarkably attuned to subtleties that many missed. Her honey blonde hair, usually gathered in 2 uneven braids she insisted on doing herself, that framed a face with thoughtful blue eyes that could focus with unusual intensity on things that interested her. Lily spoke less than other children her age, but when she did, her words carried the weight of careful consideration. Despite the challenges she faced in social settings, Lily possessed an extraordinary capacity for connection, not with large groups, but in the deep, loyal bonds she formed with those she trusted. And no bond was stronger than the one she shared with Max, the German shepherd who had become her shadow, her protector, and her best friend. Max's story began far from the Parker household, in the specialized K-9 training facilities where he had distinguished himself as one of the most promising police dogs in the department's history. With a powerful 85-pound frame covered in the classic black and tan markings of his breed, Max had been paired with Officer Daniel Reeves, one of the force's most decorated handlers. Together, they had become legendary for their work in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension. But everything changed 3 years ago during a warehouse raid that went catastrophically wrong. When armed suspects opened fire, Officer Reeves pushed his rookie partner to safety, taking a fatal bullet himself. Max had refused to leave his fallen handler, sustaining a severe shoulder wound while standing guard over Reeves' body until backup arrived. The physical trauma healed, but Max was never the same. The psychological wounds manifested in unpredictable behavior that made him unsuitable for continued service. Slated for euthanasia despite his heroic record, Max found an unexpected champion in a quiet little girl who somehow understood his pain. Willow Creek had once embodied the ideal American small town, a place where people left their doors unlocked and children played freely until streetlights flickered on. Nestled between rolling hills and bisected by the gentle creek that gave the town its name, it boasted quaint storefronts, a historic courthouse with a gleaming white clock tower, and neighborhoods of well-maintained homes with generous yards. But in recent years, economic hardship had crept in as the lumber mill and manufacturing plant downsized, leaving many without work. The opioid crisis that devastated rural communities across America hadn't spared Willow Creek, and with it came an uptick in property crime and drug-related incidents. Most troubling was the emergence of the Black Rapers, a motorcycle gang that had established itself on the town's outskirts, gradually expanding their influence through intimidation, drug distribution, and protection rackets targeting struggling local businesses. Despite the efforts of the undermanned police department, Willow Creek's sense of security had eroded, leaving residents looking over their shoulders on streets that once felt like extensions of their own homes. Officer James Parker removed his police cap and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair as he settled behind his desk at the Willow Creek Police Department. The stack of case files before him, each representing a young life teetering on the edge, had grown despite his best efforts. His community outreach program, aimed at steering vulnerable teenagers away from the Black Reaper's influence, was showing promising results. But the gang seemed to recruit 2 new members for every one James managed to save. He had started the initiative after witnessing too many promising kids surrender to addiction, their potential sacrifice to the temporary escape drugs offered from poverty and hopelessness. This morning he had spoken with Michael Reynolds, a decorated Army veteran who had returned from Afghanistan with a Purple Heart, severe PTSD, and little support. The man had fallen into dependency on pain medication and eventually heroin, his military discipline giving way to the chemical imperatives of addiction. James had found him living in his truck behind the abandoned textile factory and convinced him to enter the department's diversion program rather than face charges for possession. "You served your country," James had told him. "Now let your country serve you for a change." It was this approach, seeing the person behind the offense, that defined James's policing philosophy and sometimes put him at odds with colleagues who preferred stricter enforcement. James's phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Sarah. "Don't forget Lily's appointment at 4. He smiled, thinking of his daughter. Her challenges were considerable, but her spirit was indomitable. The smile faded as he remembered the argument with Sarah about Max. She had initially opposed keeping the troubled K9, concerned about having an animal with a history of aggression around their special needs child. "He's been through too much trauma," she had insisted. "We can't risk it with Lily." But James had seen something in the dog's eyes when Lily first approached his kennel, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred wounded souls. The first time Lily met Max remained etched in James's memory with perfect clarity. The K9 facility had been prepared to euthanize the shepherd after he failed 3 rehabilitation assessments. James had brought Lily along that day only because their babysitter had canceled last minute, never intending for her to interact with the traumatized animal. But while he discussed paperwork with the facility manager, Lily had wandered down the row of kennels, stopping directly in front of Max's enclosure. The dog that had growled at experienced handlers approached the kennel door and sat perfectly still, his intelligent eyes fixed on the little girl, who showed none of the fear or hesitation adults expected from her. "He's sad because his friend died," Lily had said with unusual directness, her finger pointing at Max. "He thinks it was his fault." The facility staff had exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one had told Lily about Officer Reeves. When James asked how she knew, she had simply shrugged. "I can see it in his eyes. He needs us." What followed was nothing short of miraculous. Max, who had been deemed too unstable for service or of adoption, transformed in Lily's presence. His rehabilitation progressed rapidly once arrangements were made for regular visits from the Parker family. The training officers couldn't explain it. The same dog that had exhibited unpredictable aggression with professionals displayed perfect gentleness with the quiet child. 3 months later, after extensive retraining and evaluation, Max officially retired from police service and joined the Parker household, where the bond between the shepherd and the little girl deepened into something extraordinary. Sarah had remained skeptical until the night of Lily's worst sensory meltdown, when the overwhelmed child had barricaded herself in her closet, unreachable by either parent. Max had somehow understood, lying patiently outside the closet door until Lily eventually emerged, her small fingers buried in his fur as she regulated her breathing to match his. From that night forward, Sarah never questioned the dog's place in their family again. Now, nearly 2 years later, Max rarely left Lily's side. He accompanied her to school as part of her IEP accommodations and waited with supernatural patience through her therapy sessions. The dog that had once been considered dangerous had become Lily's anchor in overwhelming situations, and a living buffer between her sensitive nervous system and a world that often proved too loud, too bright, and too unpredictable. This morning, when Sarah realized they had run out of Lily's favorite cereal, one of the few foods she would reliably eat for breakfast, a potential crisis had loomed. Lily's rigid routines were an essential part of her coping strategy. A disruption as simple as a missing breakfast item could spiral into a difficult day for everyone. The corner store was just 3 blocks away in their normally quiet neighborhood, and with Max as her companion, James had agreed to let Lily make the short trip on her own. "Are you sure?" Sarah had asked, eyebrows raised with concern. "She's only 8, James." "She needs to build independence," he had replied. "We can't protect her from everything forever. The store's practically visible from our front porch, and Max will be with her every step." After some discussion, they had compromised. James gave Lily the safety whistle he had purchased weeks earlier, a concession to his professional awareness of the town's changing dynamics and clear instructions to come straight home. He had watched from the porch as his daughter and the German Shepherd had set off down Maple Street, Lily's hand resting casually on Max's back, the morning sun highlighting the golden strands in her light brown hair. Now, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it, James was overcome by a sudden, inexplicable sense of foreboding. He checked his watch. Lily should have returned home 15 minutes ago. Sarah would have called if there had been any issues. He was being paranoid, he told himself, a hazard of police work. Still, he couldn't shake the creeping anxiety that tightened his chest. Perhaps he'd take an early lunch break and drive the route Lily would have walked, just to be safe. His phone rang, and his heart lurched when he saw Sarah's name on the screen. James, her voice was tight with control that barely masked panic. "Lily isn't home yet." Ryan Morris leaned against his custom Harley-Davidson, the leather of his jacket creaking as he surveyed his crew of 4 men in the abandoned gas station parking lot. At 43, Ryan carried himself with the calculated menace of someone who had spent years on both sides of the law. The jagged scar that ran from his right temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a prison yard confrontation, had become his trademark in Willow Creek, where the Black Reapers had established dominance through methodical intimidation and strategic violence. Once a decorated police officer, Ryan's fall from grace after a corruption investigation had left him with a bone-deep resentment toward the system that had discarded him, particularly toward James Parker, his former partner who had testified against him. "We've got a shipment coming through tonight," Ryan announced, flicking cigarette ash onto the cracked asphalt. "The supplier's nervous after the bust in Millfield last week. We need to make sure there are no complications." He fixed his gaze on Brian Taylor, the 25-year-old son of Willow Creek's mayor. Brian's involvement with the Reapers remained Willow Creek's worst-kept secret, his father's influence providing a layer of protection that had proven valuable on multiple occasions. "Brian, your father still has that dinner with the county commissioner tonight." Brian nodded, his perfectly styled hair and designer sunglasses at odds with the worn leather cut emblazoned with the Reaper's skull insignia. "Yeah, they'll be at the country club until at least 10. Dad's trying to secure funding for his re-election campaign." "Perfect. That keeps the heat off while we move product." Ryan turned to Michael Reynolds, the newest and most reluctant member of their crew. The former Army Ranger's combat experience and knowledge of security systems made him valuable, but his reluctance to engage in the more brutal aspects of gang life remained a concern. "Mike, you'll be our lookout at the North Bridge. I need you focused tonight. Understood?" Michael nodded stiffly, his 1,000-yard stare revealing little of the internal conflict that had been growing since James Parker had offered him a path out just that morning. The veteran's hands trembled slightly, a combination of PTSD and the early stages of withdrawal, as he reached for his cigarettes. He had joined the Reapers 6 months ago when his VA benefits had been delayed and his pain medication prescription expired, leaving him with few options for managing the constant agony in his shattered leg. The gang had provided relief, income, and a twisted approximation of the brotherhood he'd lost when his unit returned home without him. But lately the price seemed too high. "Dave, Ryan trailed off as his attention shifted to something over Dave's shoulder. Following his gaze, the men turned to see a small figure walking on the opposite side of the street, a large German Shepherd trotting alongside her. Ryan's eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. "Well, would you look at that? Isn't that Parker's kid?" The men watched as Lily Parker made her way down the sidewalk, her small hand clutching a plastic bag from Willow Creek Market. The child moved with careful deliberation, her focus seemingly directed at maintaining the precise distance between her feet and the cracks in the pavement. The German Shepherd beside her remained attentive, its head occasionally swiveling to scan their surroundings. "Looks like she's all alone except for the dog," Dave observed, a predatory edge entering his voice. "Parker must be getting careless." Ryan's expression hardened as a plan crystallized an opportunity too perfect to ignore. "Gentlemen, I think we just found our insurance policy for tonight's operation." He straightened, eyes never leaving the small figure across the street. "If Parker's sniffing around our business, having his precious daughter as a guest for a few hours might encourage him to look the other way." Brian shifted uncomfortably. "Kidnapping a kid?" "That's crossing a line, Ryan. My dad can only cover so much." "Nobody's talking about kidnapping," Ryan snapped, though his expression suggested otherwise. "We're just going to have a friendly chat with Parker's daughter, maybe keep her comfortable for a few hours while tonight's business concludes. By morning, she'll be home safe, and Parker will have learned a valuable lesson about priorities." He turned to Michael, whose face had drained of color. "Problem, soldier?" Michael forced himself to maintain eye contact. No, he lied, memories of the Afghan children he'd once protected from insurgents flashing unbidden through his mind. "No problem." "Good." Ryan mounted his motorcycle. "Follow my lead. We'll cut her off at the corner ahead. Brian, you circle behind to block her retreat. Dave, you grab the kid if the dog gets frisky." The engines roared to life, drowning out any further objections. Across the street, Lily felt the vibration of the motorcycles before she heard them. The sudden intrusion of mechanical growls sent a wave of sensory discomfort through her system. She stopped walking, her hand instinctively tightening around Max's fur as the German Shepherd tensed beside her. Motorcycles meant strangers, loud noises, and unpredictability, all things that threatened the careful equilibrium she worked so hard to maintain. Max sensed the change in Lily's breathing and positioned himself more firmly against her leg gum, providing the pressure that often helped ground her during moments of sensory overload. But there was something else in the dog's demeanor now, a vigilance that transcended his usual protective stance. His ears pivoted forward, tracking the approaching motorcycles with military precision, his body coiling with the readiness that had been instilled through years of specialized training. The motorcycles converged on their position with choreographed precision, two from the front, two from behind, and Ryan pulling directly across their path. Within seconds, Lily found herself enclosed in a circle of leather-clad men and thrumming engines, the noise and proximity sending her heart racing. She clutched her grocery bag against her chest like a shield, her eyes widening as she recognized the skull patches on their jackets, the same emblem her father had pointed out in his warnings about people to avoid. "Well, hello there, little Miss Parker," Ryan said, killing his engine and swinging his leg over his bike with calculated casualness. "Doing some shopping all by yourself today? That doesn't seem very safe." Max moved immediately, positioning himself between Lily and the approaching man. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, not the warning sound of a family pet, but the controlled aggression of a trained K-9 officer. His posture shifted subtly into the stance he had been taught for confronting armed suspects, his muscles tensed for immediate action. Ryan faltered momentarily, recognizing something in the dog's bearing that gave him pause. "Call off your mutt, kid," he said, his friendly facade slipping. "We just want to talk." Lily remained frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden confrontation. The world around her began to blur at the edges as her sensory processing struggled to manage the overload of engine noise, unfamiliar voices, and the acrid smell of exhaust and leather. But through the encroaching fog of sensory shutdown, one thing remained clear: these men meant harm. Her father's lessons about danger situations clicked into place with crystalline clarity. "Max, guard," she whispered, using the command she had overheard her father practicing with the shepherd in their backyard. The effect was instantaneous. Max's demeanor transformed entirely, his entire body becoming a weapon primed for deployment. The Black Reapers had expected a pet, perhaps even an intimidating one. What they now faced was something altogether different, an elite K-9 officer slipping back into the combat mindset that had once made him the department's most effective asset. As Dave took a step toward Lily, Max's warning growl escalated to a precisely calibrated display of controlled aggression that stopped the man in his tracks. Ryan's eyes narrowed with dawning recognition. "That's not just any dog," he said slowly, reaching toward his waistband where a concealed pistol rested. "That's a police K-9. 3 years earlier, Officer Daniel Reeves had stood in the training yard of the Midwestern K-9 Academy, a clipboard in hand as he assessed the new German Shepherd that would become his partner. This one's special. The head trainer had told him, watching as Max executed a series of complex commands with flawless precision. "The best natural aptitude I've seen in 15 years. The morning sun glinted off Max's glossy coat as he maintained perfect focus despite the distractions deliberately placed around the training course. When the simulation gunfire erupted from hidden speakers, Max didn't flinch or retreat. He advanced with controlled aggression, taking down the padded training assistant with textbook form. "His drive is off the charts," the trainer continued, "but he's got the temperament to match. Most high-drive dogs can't dial it back when needed. This one can shift from attack mode to gentle as a lamb in a split second." To demonstrate, he called Max off the training assistant. The shepherd immediately released his hold, backing away to sit at attention. When a child-sized dummy was introduced to the scenario, Max's entire demeanor transformed, his body language softening as he positioned himself protectively beside the prop, rather than engaging with it as a target. Officer Reeves and Max had become legendary in the regional law enforcement community, with 12 successful apprehensions and 15 drug busts in their first year together. The shepherd could detect narcotics hidden in the most ingenious locations, track suspects across impossible terrain, and take down armed targets with surgical precision. Their symbiotic partnership made them the department's most valuable asset in high-risk operations. "It's like they share a brain," one colleague had remarked after watching them clear a building without a single verbal command exchanged. The warehouse raid that changed everything had begun as a routine operation. Intelligence had indicated a significant shipment of fentanyl was being stored there before its distribution. What the intelligence had failed to reveal was that the warehouse was protected by former military contractors with automatic weapons and a shoot-first mentality. But when the tactical team breached the main entrance, they walked into a prepared ambush. Officer Chris Jensen, a rookie just 2 months out of the academy, had frozen in the fatal funnel of the doorway as bullets ricocheted around him. Without hesitation, Reeves had pushed Jensen to safety, stepping into the line of fire himself. Max had launched toward the nearest gunman, taking him down even as Reeves was hit. The shepherd had completed his takedown, then returned to his fallen handler, positioning himself over Reeves' body even as bullets continued to fly. Max had taken a round through his shoulder but remained steadfast, snarling at anyone who approached, including the tactical medics who arrived after the shooters were neutralized. It had taken the intervention of the K-9 unit commander to get Max to stand down, and by then Reeves was beyond saving. In the weeks that followed, Max had changed. The shepherd that had once executed commands with joyful precision now responded unpredictably. During his evaluation, he had completed the course perfectly, then unexpectedly turned on the training assistant when the man made a sudden movement. 3 different handlers had attempted to work with him, but Max had refused to bond with any of them. The final incident came when Max attacked a maintenance worker who had entered the K-9 facility carrying a tool that resembled a weapon. Though no serious injury occurred, the department couldn't risk keeping a K-9 with unpredictable aggression triggers. Max was scheduled for euthanasia until James Parker intervened, having heard about the shepherd situation from a fellow officer. As the memory faded, Max's focus sharpened on the immediate threat before him. The men surrounding Lily carried the same tension in their bodies that Max had been trained to identify in armed suspects. His years of police work might have been behind him, but the instincts and training remained hardwired into his responses. The man directly in front of Lily, the one with the jagged scar, was reaching slowly toward his waistband in a movement Max recognized all too well. "Dave, grab the kid," Ryan directed, his hand still hovering near his concealed weapon. "The rest of you deal with the dog." As Dave lunged toward Lily, Max exploded into action with the precision that had once made him the department's most valuable K-9 asset. His powerful jaws clamped around Dave's forearm with exactly enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage, a technique perfected through hundreds of training sessions. Dave howled in pain and surprise, dropping to his knees as Max maintained his hold. "Get this thing off me," he screamed, his free hand flailing uselessly against Max's solid form. Brian Taylor stood frozen, his privileged upbringing having ill-prepared him for the reality of violence. The mayor's son had joined the Black Reapers in a misguided act of rebellion against his father's political legacy, enticed by the power and excitement the gang seemed to offer. In his fantasies of outlaw brotherhood, scenarios involving attacking children and facing trained police dogs had never featured. As Max locked eyes with him over Dave's immobilized form, Brian felt a wave of shame wash over him. His father's face flashed in his mind, not the stern, disapproving expression he was accustomed to, but the devastated look he would wear when he learned his son had participated in threatening a child. "This isn't what I signed up for," Brian muttered, backing toward his motorcycle. "We're crossing lines here, Ryan. Shut up and help Dave," Ryan shouted, his careful planning unraveling as Max maintained his tactical advantage. Ryan had encountered K-9 units during his police career, but watching Max's calculated responses reawakened his understanding of just how dangerous these animals could be when deployed. This wasn't a family pet acting on protective instinct. This was a trained officer executing tactical decisions with methodical precision. Michael Reynolds watched the scene unfold with growing internal conflict. The former Army Ranger had joined the Black Reapers in desperation after his support systems failed him, but there had always been lines he wouldn't cross. His time in Afghanistan had instilled an unshakable code about protecting the innocent, particularly children. Watching his new brothers threaten a little girl triggered something primal in him, memories of the orphaned Afghan children his unit had protected, of the oath he had taken to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. "We need to back off," Michael said, his military bearing reasserting itself as he stepped forward. "This is wrong. She's just a kid." Ryan spun toward him, fury distorting his scarred features. "You going soft on me, soldier? Remember who gave you a place when nobody else would." "There's nothing soft about having lines you don't cross," Michael responded, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had once directed men in combat. "This isn't about drugs or territory. This is a child." Lily stood trembling behind Max, her sensory system overwhelmed but her awareness acute. Through the fog of anxiety, she remembered her father's safety instructions. With shaking fingers, she reached for the whistle hanging around her neck and blew 3 short blasts, the emergency signal James had drilled her to use in dangerous situations. The piercing sound startled the bikers and caused Dave to renew his struggles against Max's hold. Ryan's patience snapped. He drew his pistol and aimed it at Max. "Let him go, or I put a bullet in you," he snarled at the shepherd. Max didn't release his grip. He had been trained to maintain apprehension holds even under threat, one of the many scenarios Officer Reeves had drilled repeatedly during their partnership. The shepherd's eyes remained locked on Ryan, assessing the new threat level while maintaining control of his current target. "I said let go." Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. Michael moved without conscious thought, years of combat training taking over as he stepped between Ryan's gun and the dog. "Put it down, Ryan. You shoot that dog with the Parker girl watching. There's no coming back from that. The entire department will hunt us down." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Ryan slowly lowered his weapon. "Fine, we'll do this another way." He jerked his chin toward Lily. "Kid, call off your dog or things are going to get real ugly for your friend Dave here." Lily's mind raced. Her father had explained that Max had special training, that he had once been a police dog who knew how to protect people. But she had never seen this side of him before, the precise, controlled power that transformed her gentle companion into a formidable weapon. The dichotomy was difficult for her to process through her already overwhelmed senses. "Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Release. Max immediately let go of Dave's arm but maintained his protective stance in front of Lily, his attention now divided between the injured man scrambling backward and Ryan, who still held the gun at his side. The shepherd's tactical assessment was clear. The man with the scar represented the primary threat. Dave clutched his arm, blood seeping between his fingers as he backed toward his motorcycle. "That thing broke my arm," he yelled, his face pale with shock and pain. "I need a hospital, Ryan." "Nobody's going anywhere until we settle this," Ryan replied coldly, but his confident facade was cracking. The simple intimidation of a child had escalated into a situation with potentially severe consequences. If Parker discovered his involvement in threatening Lily, Ryan's recently established power in Willow Creek would be jeopardized. "Moreover, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his former police training was reminding him of the additional charges that threatening a minor would add to his already substantial criminal liability. Throughout the confrontation, Brian had been edging away from the scene, his privileged upbringing asserting itself in a moment of moral clarity. "This is over, Ryan," he announced, mounting his motorcycle. "I'm out." Without waiting for a response, he kick-started his bike and roared away, leaving a cloud of dust and the tatters of his outlaw aspirations behind. Ryan's face darkened with fury at the desertion. "You'll regret that, rich boy," he muttered, before turning his attention back to the immediate problem. With Dave injured, Brian fled, and Michael's loyalty clearly wavering, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The simple intimidation tactic had deteriorated into a potential disaster. A decision crystallized in Ryan's mind. He needed to regain control of the situation quickly. In a swift motion, he lunged forward, intending to grab Lily as leverage before Max could react. "Come here, kid." "Mate." Max responded with explosive speed, launching himself between Ryan and Lily with a ferocity that belied his methodical training. His teeth snapped inches from Ryan's outstretched hand, forcing the gang leader to stumble backward. Ryan raised his gun again, panic overriding tactical thought. Michael moved in the same instant, his military training engaging automatically at the sight of a weapon aimed toward a child. He tackled Ryan from the side, both men crashing to the pavement as the gun skittered away across the asphalt. "Run," he shouted to Lily. "Take your dog and run." Lily remained frozen, her overwhelmed system unable to process the rapid sequence of events. Max, however, understood the tactical situation perfectly. With Ryan temporarily neutralized, the shepherd circled back to Lily, pressing firmly against her leg, the pressure technique he had learned would sometimes break through her sensory paralysis during overwhelming situations. The physical contact succeeded where verbal commands had failed. Lily's hand automatically went to Max's fur, the familiar texture grounding her enough to regain partial function. She took a stumbling step backward, then another, clutching Max's collar as the shepherd guided her retreat while maintaining a protective position between her and the struggling men. On the ground, Ryan had gained the upper hand against Michael, his rage providing an adrenaline advantage over the veteran's combat experience dulled by months of substance abuse. "You're dead," Ryan hissed, landing a solid punch that sent Michael's head snapping back against the pavement. "You hear me? Dead." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the chaos. Lily's whistle had apparently attracted attention, or perhaps a passerby had called in the disturbance. Ryan froze mid-punch, his survival instincts overriding his rage. With a final vicious blow to Michael's ribs, he scrambled to his feet. "Dave, we're leaving." "Now," Ryan barked, racing for his motorcycle. Dave, still clutching his injured arm, needed no further encouragement. Both men mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life as they prepared to flee. Ryan took one final look at Lily and Max, his expression promising future retribution. "This isn't over, kid. Tell your daddy Ryan Morris says hello." With that parting threat, he accelerated away, Dave following closely behind. Michael remained on the ground, blood trickling from his split lip as he watched them disappear around the corner. Turning toward Lily, who stood trembling with her arms wrapped tightly around Max's neck, he managed a pained smile. "You've got quite a partner there," he said softly, wincing as he touched his ribs. "Your dad's the officer who talked to me this morning, isn't he? About getting clean?" Lily nodded hesitantly, her hand never leaving Max's fur. "Tell him," Michael hesitated, spitting blood onto the pavement. "Tell him I'm ready to take him up on that offer now." The sirens grew louder as a police cruiser rounded the corner, tires screeching as it pulled to a stop beside them. Officer James Parker exploded from the driver's seat, his face ashen with fear as he raced toward his daughter. "Lily," he shouted, dropping to his knees before her. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Before Lily could respond, Max turned toward James and barked once, the alert signal he had been trained to give when completing a successful apprehension. Despite the severity of the situation, James felt a reluctant smile tug at his lips. Some training never faded, apparently. "Dad," Lily said, her voice small but steady as she pointed to Michael. "He helped us. The bad men wanted to take me, but Max stopped them, and this man told me to run." She paused, her brow furrowing with the effort of delivering a complete message through her lingering sensory overload. "He says he wants to take your offer now." James looked from his daughter to the battered man on the ground, recognition dawning as he identified Michael Reynolds from their conversation earlier that day. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The Black Reapers had targeted his daughter, and the veteran he'd tried to help had chosen to protect her instead. "An ambulance is on the way," James said, offering Michael a hand up. "I think we have a lot to talk about." The Willow Creek Medical Center hummed with activity as James Parker paced the waiting room, his police radio crackling with updates from officers pursuing Ryan Morris and the remaining Black Reapers. Sarah sat nearby, her arm protectively around Lily, who remained uncharacteristically still, her eyes fixed on the double doors leading to the treatment areas where doctors were tending to Michael Reynolds' injuries. Max lay at Lily's feet, his vigilant gaze never leaving the entrance to the waiting room, his body still carrying the alert tension of a K-9 officer on duty. "The mayor's asking for updates every 15 minutes, Chief Thomas Green said quietly, joining James by the window. At 58, Green's weathered face carried the lines of 25 years in law enforcement, the last 10 as Willow Creek's chief of police. His son just walked into the station and confessed to being part of the Black Reapers. Says he was there when they tried to grab Lily." James's hand tightened on the windowsill. "Brian Taylor was there. Did he touch my daughter?" "No," Green replied, placing a calming hand on James's shoulder. According to his statement, he backed out when he realized what Morris was planning. "He's giving us everything: locations, operations, names." The mayor's beside himself. James exhaled slowly, forcing himself to release the murderous rage that had been building since he'd found Lily trembling on that street corner. "What about Morris?" "We've got roadblocks on every exit from the county, and state police are involved now. Morris knows his operation is blown. He's desperate." Green paused, lowering his voice further. "James, there's something else you should know. Morris has been telling his crew that you betrayed him during the corruption investigation 3 years ago. He's made this personal." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "This wasn't random," James said, the realization washing over him like ice water. "He targeted Lily specifically because she's my daughter." Before Green could respond, the emergency department doors burst open as a doctor emerged, making directly for James. "Officer Parker, Michael Reynolds is asking for you. He's stable, but insistent about speaking with you immediately." James followed the doctor through the labyrinth of curtained examination rooms to where Michael lay, his face mottled with bruises, an IV snaking from his arm. Despite his injuries, the veteran's eyes were clearer than they had been during their conversation that morning pain had replaced the haze of opioids. "Parker," Michael struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. "You need to know Morris didn't just want to scare you. He's planning something bigger. The shipment coming tonight is just a cover." James pulled a chair close to the bedside. What do you mean? The real plan is to hit the evidence lockup at the police station. Morris has a contact inside who's going to let them in during shift change. They're after something specific from the Johansson case last year, something worth millions that was never logged properly. Michael gripped James's wrist with surprising strength. Morris knows your access codes. He bragged about it. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Johansson case had been his investigation of local businessmen laundering money for cartels through his furniture import business. Among the seized items had been a shipment of antique tables with hollowed legs containing uncut diamonds, a secondary smuggling operation that hadn't been made public. "When is this happening?" James demanded. "Right, 9 o'clock. Morris is still going ahead with it. He thinks having the department distracted by searching for him works in his favor." Michael's eyes darted to the door, lowering his voice. "There's more. Morris said something about taking what Parker loves before he leaves town." "I think he meant." "Lily," James finished, already rising. "I need to get my family to safety." He rushed back to the waiting room, his mind racing through contingency plans. As he approached Sarah and Lily, the hospital's overhead lights flickered once, then extinguished completely, plunging the ward into darkness for the 3 seconds before emergency generators activated. In that brief moment of darkness, Max surged to his feet with a warning growl. When the backup lights illuminated the scene, Ryan Morris stood in the emergency entrance, a pistol in one hand and what appeared to be a remote detonator in the other. Behind him, Dave and 2 other Reapers blocked the exit, their faces obscured by motorcycle helmets with darkened visors. "Nobody moves," Ryan shouted, his voice carrying over the startled cries of patients and staff. "Parker, I know you're here. Show yourself or I start shooting random people." James stepped forward from the hallway, his service weapon drawn. "Morris, put it down. The building is surrounded." "No, it isn't," Ryan replied with a smirk. "Your boys are all out chasing decoys. But I've got something you want, and you've got something I need." He gestured with the detonator. "This controls charges placed on the gas main outside. One press, and this place goes up with everyone in it, including your precious family." Patients and medical staff pressed themselves against walls or ducked behind furniture, several fumbling with phones to call for help. Sarah pulled Lily against her, shielding the child with her body as James assessed his tactical options. The range was too great for an accurate shot, and the risk of hitting civilians was unacceptable. "What do you want, Ryan?" James asked, keeping his weapon trained on his former partner. "Access to the evidence lockup. The diamonds from the Johansson case. They're my retirement plan." Ryan's scarred face twisted into a parody of a smile. "You're going to call the station, use your override code to dismiss the officers on duty, then meet me there with the keys and combinations." "And if I refuse?" Ryan's gaze shifted to Sarah and Lily. "Then I take your family instead. They'll be my insurance until I'm safely away. Your choice, partner." James felt cold fury washing through him, but kept his expression neutral. "You really think you're walking away from this?" "I know I am. Because you've always been weak, James. Always putting others before the job." Ryan gestured with the gun toward Lily. "Like now. You're calculating whether you can shoot me before I press this button, but you won't risk it. That hesitation is why I was always the better cop." Throughout the exchange, Max had maintained perfect stillness beside Lily, his training asserting itself as he awaited commands. The shepherd's ears were fully alert, his muscles coiled with potential energy as his gaze remained fixed on Ryan. Lily, pressed against her mother, felt Max's controlled tension through the hand she kept buried in his fur. A childhood of navigating a world that overwhelmed her senses had made Lily exceptionally observant of subtle details that others missed. Now, despite her fear, she noticed something crucial. Ryan's finger on the detonator wasn't actually touching the button. The device itself looked suspiciously like a garage door opener with its casing painted black. Her father had taught her about bluffing in their weekly chess games, This realization crystallized into certainty. Ryan was bluffing. Lily leaned close to her mother's ear. "The bad man is pretending," she whispered. "His button isn't real." Sarah's eyes widened, but she gave no other indication she'd heard as she assessed the situation independently. Her medical training allowed her to notice what her husband might have missed in the heat of confrontation. Ryan's pupils were unnaturally dilated, his movements displaying the telltale indicators of someone in the throes of stimulant use. His judgment would be impaired, making him even more dangerous. "James," Sarah called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's high. Probably meth." Ryan's attention snapped to Sarah, his expression darkening. "Shut up. One more word, Anne." The momentary distraction was all James needed. "Max, protect," he commanded sharply. The German Shepherd exploded into action with breathtaking speed, crossing the waiting room in a blur of focused aggression. Ryan pivoted, trying to bring his weapon to bear on the charging dog, but Max was already airborne, a 70-pound missile of muscle and precision training. The impact knocked Ryan backward through the emergency entrance doors, the gun and detonator flying from his hands as both man and dog crashed onto the pavement outside. Chaos erupted in the waiting room as Dave and the other Reapers moved to intervene. James sprinted forward, tackling Dave before he could draw a concealed weapon. "Police. Everyone down," he shouted, grappling with the larger man as patients and staff dove for cover. Outside, Max had Ryan pinned, his teeth locked on the gang leader's arm with professional precision, enough pressure to immobilize without severing arteries. Ryan bucked and twisted, his free hand landing blows on Max's ribs that would have caused a lesser dog to release his hold. But Max had been trained to maintain apprehension through pain and distraction, his focus absolute as he used his weight to keep his target immobilized. "Get this fucking dog off me," Ryan screamed, blood streaming from the puncture wounds on his forearm as he continued to struggle. Inside, the remaining Reapers found themselves surrounded as hospital security responded to the disturbance, their own weapons drawn. Recognizing the futility of continued resistance, they raised their hands in surrender. James, having subdued Dave with a painful arm lock, glanced toward the doors where Max continued to hold Ryan immobile despite the gang leader's increasingly desperate struggles. "Sarah, get Lily to a secure room," James directed, handcuffing Dave before rushing toward the entrance. Outside, the situation had deteriorated critically. Ryan, in his drug-fueled frenzy, had managed to reach a hidden boot knife with his free hand. As James burst through the doors, he saw the blade arcing toward Max's exposed flank. "Max, release," James shouted, drawing his weapon. Max instantly let go and jumped clear, but not quite fast enough. The knife sliced across his hindquarters, drawing a spray of blood that stained the pavement. The shepherd stumbled, momentarily thrown off balance by the injury, giving Ryan the opening he needed to scramble to his feet. "You're finished, Morris," James said, his weapon trained on his former partner's center mass. On the ground. "Now." Ryan, wild-eyed and bleeding, shifted his grip on the knife. "You won't shoot me, James. You don't have the guts." "Try me," James replied, his voice deadly calm. "You threaten my family. There's nothing I wouldn't do to protect them." For a moment, the two former partners locked eyes across the pavement, one standing firm in defense of everything he loved, the other consumed by hatred and desperation. Then Ryan's gaze darted to the side, where Max was regaining his footing despite the blood streaming from his wound. "That mutt should have been put down years ago," Ryan snarled, suddenly pivoting and lunging toward the injured shepherd, knife raised for a killing blow. James fired twice. The shots echoed across the hospital parking lot as Ryan crumpled mid-stride, the knife clattering uselessly beside him. He lay motionless on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him as James approached cautiously, weapon still trained on his fallen adversary. "Officer needs assistance. Shots fired." "Suspect down," James reported into his radio, kicking the knife away before checking Ryan's pulse. Finding none, he holstered his weapon and immediately turned his attention to Max. The German Shepherd had maintained his position despite his injury, his training holding even as blood soaked his hind leg. Only when James knelt beside him did Max finally allow himself to whine softly, acknowledging the pain he'd been stoically ignoring. "Good boy," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he applied pressure to the wound. "The best boy. We need a veterinarian." He shouted toward the hospital entrance where staff were cautiously emerging. "Officer down." Within moments, hospital security had secured the area as Sarah rushed out with trauma supplies. "Move your hands," she directed, her medical training taking over as she assessed Max's injury. "The cut is deep, but it missed the femoral artery. He needs surgery, but he's stable for transport." As if summoned by the unfolding drama, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as backup finally arrived. Chief Green's cruiser was the first to screech into the parking lot, the chief himself leaping out with weapon drawn before surveying the scene and recognizing that the threat had been neutralized. The station, James called to him, still applying pressure to Max's wound. Morris was planning to hit the evidence lockup. "He has someone on the inside." Green nodded grimly, already speaking into his radio to order the station secured and all personnel accounted for. As additional officers arrived to take control of the scene, James felt a small hand on his shoulder. Turning, he found Lily standing beside him, her face pale but composed as she looked down at Max. "He's hurt," she said simply, her voice tight with concern. "Yes, sweetheart, but Mom says he's going to be okay. We need to get him to the animal hospital right away." Lily knelt beside Max, seemingly oblivious to the blood soaking into her jeans as she placed her small hand gently on the shepherd's head. "You saved us," she whispered to him. "Now we'll save you." The emergency veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Willow Creek was a stark, utilitarian building that belied the sophisticated medical equipment it housed. James Parker carried Max through the sliding doors, the German shepherd's blood soaking through the police jacket that had been hastily wrapped around his wound. Sarah followed closely with Lily, whose small face remained composed despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. The clinic staff responded immediately to the emergency, a team of veterinary technicians rushing forward with a gurney as the lead veterinarian, Dr. Emily Wilson, emerged from an examination room. "GSW?" Dr. Wilson asked briskly, already examining Max as the technicians transferred him onto the gurney. "Knife wound to the right hind quarter," Sarah replied, her medical training allowing her to communicate efficiently. "Approximately 6-inch laceration, deep tissue involvement, significant blood loss, but no arterial spray. He's been conscious and responsive throughout transport." Dr. Wilson nodded, applying a pressure bandage as she directed her team. "Rep or 2. I want a full blood panel, IV access, and 4 units of canine blood ready. Officer Parker, I need you to sign consent forms. We're looking at emergency surgery." James hesitated, his hand still on Max's head. The shepherd's eyes remained locked on his, trust evident despite the pain. "Will he make it?" "We'll do everything possible," Dr. Wilson replied, her professionalism not quite masking the concern in her eyes as she noted Max's rapidly paling gums and increasingly labored breathing. "But I need to get him into surgery immediately. The blood loss is substantial, and there may be damage we can't see externally." As Max was wheeled toward the operating room, Lily broke away from her mother and rushed to the gurney side. "Wait," she called, her voice unusually clear and commanding. The staff paused, looking to Dr. Wilson, who nodded permission. Lily leaned close to Max's ear, her small hand gentle on his muzzle. "You have to fight," she whispered fiercely. "You're the bravest dog in the world, and I need you to come back to me." Max, despite his weakened state, managed to lift his head enough to lick Lily's hand once before the veterinary team continued their urgent journey toward the operating room. The double doors swung shut behind them, leaving the Parker family in the sudden, deafening silence of the waiting area. "He heard you," James said softly, kneeling beside his daughter. "Max is a fighter. He won't give up." Lily nodded solemnly, her analytical mind processing information in her unique way. "He lost a lot of blood," she observed with clinical detachment that did nothing to mask the fear underneath. The knife cut very deep. I saw muscle tissue. Sarah joined them, placing a steadying hand on Lily's shoulder. "You're right, sweetheart. It's a serious injury. But Max is receiving excellent care from Dr. Wilson. She's the best veterinary surgeon in the county." The waiting room clock ticked relentlessly as minutes stretched into hours. Chief Green arrived with updates the conspiracy at the police station had been uncovered, with a desk sergeant named Matthews confessing to his arrangement with Ryan Morris. The remaining Black Reapers had been apprehended, and Brian Taylor was cooperating fully with authorities. Michael Reynolds had been stabilized and was providing detailed statements about the gang's operations. The mayor's on damage control, Green informed James quietly. Having his son mixed up in this is a political nightmare, but he's more concerned about making amends. He's offered to cover all of Max's medical expenses as a start. James nodded absently, his attention focused on Lily, who sat perfectly still in a waiting room chair, her body rigid with the effort of managing her sensory responses to the overwhelming environment of the veterinary clinic. The harsh fluorescent lighting, antiseptic smells, and occasional sounds of animals in distress created a perfect storm of triggers for her condition. "Lily needs to go home," he said to Sarah. "This place is too much for her." Sarah shook her head. "I already suggested it. She refuses to leave until we know Max is okay." As if hearing her name, Lily looked up. "I'm staying," she said firmly. "Max wouldn't leave me." 4 hours into surgery, Dr. Wilson emerged from the operating room, her scrubs stained with blood, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. The Parker family rose as one, tension vibrating through them as they searched her face for clues. The surgery was more complicated than anticipated. Dr. Wilson began, removing her surgical cap. The knife caused extensive damage. It severed several major muscles, nicked the femoral artery, and caused a hairline fracture to the femur itself. James felt his heart sink. "But he's alive?" "Yes," Dr. Wilson confirmed, "but he's critical. We've repaired the arterial damage and transfused 4 units of blood. The muscle damage was extensive. I had to place over 100 internal sutures to reattach the tissue. The next 24 hours will be decisive." "Can we see him?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. Dr. Wilson hesitated, glancing at Sarah for guidance. "He's heavily sedated and connected to numerous monitoring devices. It might be upsetting." "Please," Lily interrupted, unusual for a child who typically avoided direct confrontation. "He needs to know we're here." After a moment's consideration, Dr. Wilson nodded. Briefly, "He's in recovery now." The recovery ward was dimly lit and quiet except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Max lay on a padded table, his powerful body now looking strangely diminished beneath a warming blanket. A breathing tube protruded from his mouth, and multiple IV lines delivered fluids, antibiotics, and pain medication. His surgically repaired leg was heavily bandaged and elevated on a cushioned support. Lily approached the table slowly, her usual sensory aversion seemingly forgotten as she focused entirely on Max. She placed her small hand gently on his head, careful to avoid disturbing the IV catheter in his foreleg. "I'm here," she said simply, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "You did it, Max. You saved me, and now you have to get better." The monitoring equipment continued its rhythmic beeping, but Max remained motionless, the powerful K-9 officer now reduced to a vulnerable patient fighting for his life. Dr. Wilson checked the monitors, making minor adjustments to the IV flow. "His vitals are stable for now," she informed them quietly. "But he's not out of danger. The next few hours are critical." "What are his chances?" James asked, the question haunting him since they'd arrived. Dr. Wilson's professional demeanor softened with compassion. "If he makes it through the night, his chances improve significantly. Max is young and was in excellent health before the injury. But I need to be honest, the damage was severe. Even if he recovers, he may never regain full function in that leg." The implications hung heavily in the air. A K-9 officer, even a retired one who couldn't run or jump effectively, was a K-9 officer who had lost a fundamental part of his identity. You mean he might be? Lily searched for the right word, her analytical mind processing the information with precision despite her emotional distress. Disabled, Dr. Wilson supplied gently. Yes, that's a possibility we need to prepare for. The femur will heal, but the muscle damage may result in permanent weakness or limited range of motion. Lily nodded, absorbing this information with the directness characteristic of her condition. That's okay, she said finally. He doesn't need to chase bad guys anymore. He just needs to be Max. The simplicity and acceptance in her statement brought unexpected tears to James's eyes. He placed his hand alongside Lily's on Max's head, feeling the familiar texture of the shepherd's fur beneath his fingers. Dr. Wilson is right, Lily, Sarah added, her medical knowledge compelling her to prepare her daughter for difficult possibilities. Even if Max survives, his recovery will be long and painful. He might not be the same dog you remember. He'll always be Max, Lily replied with absolute certainty. Just like I'm always Lily, even on days when my brain works differently. As the night deepened, Max's condition began to deteriorate. His temperature rose sharply despite cooling measures, and his blood pressure dropped to concerning levels. Dr. Wilson administered additional medications, her face growing increasingly grave as she monitored his responses. He's developing complications, she explained to James and Sarah while Lily slept fitfully in a waiting room chair. The extensive tissue damage is causing a systemic inflammatory response. His body is essentially attacking itself. What can we do? James asked, desperation edging his voice. We're doing everything medically possible, Dr. Wilson replied. The rest is up to Max. Around 3 a.m., the critical moment arrived. Max's heart rate became erratic, the monitor displaying worrying arrhythmias as his oxygen levels plummeted. The veterinary team rushed into action, administering emergency medications as Dr. Wilson performed chest compressions. He's crashing. A veterinary technician called out, adjusting the oxygen flow. Lily awoke to the commotion, immediately alert despite the hour. Before either parent could stop her, she slipped into the treatment area, watching with wide eyes as the medical team fought to stabilize Max. Don't leave, she whispered, her hands pressed against the glass partition. Please don't leave us, Max. For 3 agonizing minutes, Dr. Wilson and her team worked frantically to stabilize Max. The emergency medications gradually took effect, and the erratic beeping of the monitor slowly steadied into a more regular rhythm. Dr. Wilson stepped back, wiping perspiration from her brow as she checked the latest readings. He's back, she announced with cautious relief. His vitals are stabilizing. Lily remained at the observation window, her small hands pressed against the glass as if trying to reach Max through sheer force of will. James and Sarah stood behind her, emotionally drained from the night's ordeal. Is he going to be okay now? Lily asked, her analytical mind seeking concrete information even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Dr. Wilson approached the family, her professional demeanor softened by genuine compassion. He's fought his way back from the brink, which is a very good sign. His body is showing remarkable resilience. I believe we've turned a corner, but he's still critical. The next few hours will tell us more. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, casting long shadows through the clinic windows, Chief Green returned with a manila folder tucked under his arm. His expression was grim as he requested a private word with James. The two men stepped into a small consultation room while Sarah stayed with Lily at Max's bedside. I've been investigating Morris's background more thoroughly, Green began, opening the folder to reveal personnel files and case reports. There's something you need to know, James. It goes back much further than we thought. James leaned forward, exhaustion momentarily forgotten as he examined the documents. What am I looking at? Morris's service record before he came to Willow Creek, Green replied, specifically his time with the County K-9 unit 7 years ago. James scanned the files, his fatigue-clouded mind gradually processing the information before him. Suddenly he froze, rereading a particular passage with growing disbelief. This can't be right. Morris was Officer Reeves' first partner. Green nodded solemnly. For 3 years. They were the department's top K-9 team until Morris was transferred following a disciplinary review. Reeves testified against him in a misconduct hearing excessive force during an arrest. Morris was cleared but reassigned. He carried that grudge for years. And then Reeves got Max as his new partner, James muttered, the pieces clicking into terrible alignment. The partner who replaced Morris became a decorated officer with the department's best K-9. Morris was assigned to our department a year later, Green continued. He kept his connection to Reeves quiet. I don't think anyone made the connection until I started digging last night. So when Morris saw Max with Lily today, he recognized his former rival's dog, Green confirmed. The dog that, in his mind, should have been his. It wasn't just about getting back at you, James. It was about settling old scores on multiple fronts. James sat back, processing this revelation with growing horror. All this time I thought the corruption case was his motive for targeting me. But this is much deeper. There's more, Green said, pulling out another document. Remember the warehouse raid where Reeves was killed? Morris was the supervising officer who provided the intelligence for that operation. The implication struck James like a physical blow. Are you saying Morris deliberately sent them into an ambush? I'm saying there are serious questions about the intelligence he provided. The investigation was inconclusive, but in light of recent events, we're reopening it. Green paused, his expression grave. Morris might have been responsible for Reeves' death and for Max's trauma. As this first revelation settled heavily between them, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A younger officer entered, his expression betraying his discomfort. Chief, we've completed the preliminary investigation at Morris's residence as you ordered. We found something you and Officer Parker should see immediately. He handed over a weathered leather notebook, Morris's personal journal. Green flipped through it quickly before stopping at a page marked with a red tab. He read silently for a moment before passing it to James. This entry is from 2 years ago, Green said quietly, when Max was scheduled for euthanasia after failing his rehabilitation assessments. James read the passage, his blood running cold at Morris's handwritten words. Karma finally caught up with Reeves' wonder dog. After the incident with the maintenance worker, they've scheduled the mutt for termination. Poetic justice that he'll be put down for the same aggression issues I was accused of. Should have happened long ago. I made sure the rehab assessments were designed for failure easy enough with my contacts at the training facility. No dog that reminds anyone of Reeves deserves to live, especially not his prized K-9. He sabotaged Max's evaluations, James whispered, horror and rage battling within him. He made sure Max would fail. And if your family hadn't adopted him, Morris would have succeeded, Green confirmed grimly. This wasn't just a gang leader targeting a cop's family, James. This was a calculated, years-long vendetta. As the two men sat processing these revelations, another knock came at the door. This time it was Dr. Wilson, her expression unreadable. Officer Parker, there's someone here who's asking to speak with you about Max. He says it's urgent. James exchanged a glance with Green before following Dr. Wilson to the waiting area, where a man in his early 50s sat with his head bowed. The stranger looked up as they approached, revealing a weathered face lined with exhaustion and what appeared to be deep remorse. Officer Parker. The man stood, extending his hand. My name is Mark Stevens. I need to tell you something about your dog. James tensed, immediately suspicious. How do you know about Max? Because I saved him once, Stevens replied, his voice rough with emotion. During the warehouse raid where Officer Reeves was killed. I was there. Green stepped forward. Are you confessing to participation in that incident, Mr. Stevens? No, Stevens shook his head emphatically. I was an undercover DEA agent embedded with the cartel organization using that warehouse. When the raid went bad, I couldn't blow my cover, but I couldn't stand by either. His voice faltered. I was the one who called in the anonymous tip that led back up to the scene. And I was the one who managed to stop the cartel enforcers from killing that shepherd when he was protecting his fallen handler. James stared at the man, struggling to process this new information. You were there? You saw what happened to Reeves? Stevens nodded, grief evident in his expression. Morris had been feeding information to the cartel for months, selling out police operations for cash. He told them exactly when the raid would happen, how many officers would be involved. It was a setup from the beginning. Why are you coming forward now? Green demanded, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Because I saw the news about what happened at the hospital, Stevens replied. I've been following Morris's activities since I left the DE. When I heard that the same dog was involved, he paused, collecting himself. I couldn't stay silent anymore. That shepherd saved my life too. After he took down one of the gunmen, the man was about to shoot me when I approached Reeves. Max could have attacked me, but somehow he sensed I wasn't a threat. James felt the room sway slightly as the full weight of these revelations settled over him. So Max wasn't just protecting Reeves during the raid. He was making judgment calls about who was really a threat. The most remarkable K9 I've ever seen, Stevens confirmed. In 20 years undercover, I've worked with dozens of police dogs. None had his instincts. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, offering it to James. I took this from the warehouse security camera before the backup arrived. I've kept it all these years as a reminder that courage comes in many forms. The grainy image showed Max standing protectively over Reeves' fallen body, blood darkening his shoulder, teeth bared as he kept gunmen at bay. And partially visible behind a stack of crates, a figure that must have been Stevens, his face tense with the impossible choice between maintaining his cover and helping the wounded officer and his loyal partner. Max didn't fail those rehabilitation tests because of trauma or unpredictable aggression, Stevens said quietly. He failed because he could sense something wasn't right with the evaluators Morris had selected. Dogs like him can detect deception, ulterior motives. What looked like aggression was actually continuing to do his job, protecting against threats others couldn't see. In the recovery room, as if somehow aware of the truths being revealed about his past, Max stirred slightly. His eyes opened briefly, focusing hazily on Lily, who had remained steadfastly by his side. The monitoring equipment registered a strengthening in his vital signs, subtle but unmistakable. He's responding, Dr. Wilson said with cautious optimism as she checked his readings. His condition is improving. Sarah called James, who rushed to the recovery room with Green and Stevens close behind. As they entered, Max's eyes fully opened, recognition dawning as he saw James. The shepherd's tail moved weakly against the blanket, the slightest wag, but unmistakable in its meaning. He's coming back to us, Lily said, absolute certainty in her voice as she gently stroked Max's head. He knows we need him. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Ryan Morris, Willow Creek began its slow return to normalcy. The police department, now under increased scrutiny following the exposure of corruption within its ranks, implemented comprehensive reforms under Chief Green's determined leadership. The Black Reapers had been dismantled, their operations exposed through Michael Reynolds' detailed testimony and Brian Taylor's cooperation. The mayor, humbled by his son's involvement, established a community rehabilitation program for at-risk youth and veterans, with funds drawn from his own considerable family fortune. At the Parker residence, the living room had been transformed into a recovery suite for Max. A specialized orthopedic bed donated by a local veterans support group occupied the center of the room, the position to allow the convalescing shepherd a clear view of both the front door and the backyard through wide windows. Medical supplies were neatly arranged on a nearby table: antibiotics, pain management medications, and fresh bandages for his daily wound care. James entered the house after his shift, the weight of his badge feeling different now after all that had transpired. The internal affairs investigation into Ryan Morris's years of corruption had exonerated James completely, while revealing the extent of his former partner's betrayal. The diamonds from the Johansson case had been properly documented and secured, with Morris's conspiracy to steal them thoroughly documented in court records. "How's our patient today?" James asked, setting down his keys and kneeling beside Max's bed. The German Shepherd raised his head immediately, his tail thumping against the cushioned surface in a steady rhythm that grew stronger each day. Though still unable to stand without assistance, Max's eyes had regained their alert intelligence, tracking movements throughout the house with the vigilance that had once made him an exceptional K-9 officer. He ate all his lunch for the first time, Sarah reported, emerging from the kitchen with a pitcher of iced tea. And Dr. Wilson called with his latest test results. The infection markers are finally normal, and the muscle tissue is showing good signs of regeneration. "That's my boy," James said, gently scratching behind Max's ears. "Always the overachiever." Lily sat cross-legged beside Max's bed, working through a set of flashcards as part of her homeschool curriculum. The school administration had agreed to a temporary remote learning arrangement following the traumatic events, recognizing that separating Lily from Max during his recovery would be detrimental to both. The shepherd had become a crucial factor in Lily's ability to process the psychological aftermath of the attack, just as she had become essential to his healing. "Dad," Lily said without looking up from her work, "Mr. Stevens is coming at 4 o'clock. He said he's bringing the special harness." James checked his watch. "That's in 20 minutes. I'd better get cleaned up." Mark Stevens had retired from the DEA following his testimony about the warehouse raid and Morris's corruption. His evidence had posthumously cleared Officer Reeves' record of any operational negligence while establishing Morris's culpability in the deadly ambush. Now Stevens had dedicated his considerable experience to training service and therapy dogs, with a particular focus on rehabilitating injured working dogs like Max. When Stevens arrived, he carried a sophisticated supportive harness designed specifically for canines recovering from hind leg injuries. This model was developed for military working dogs injured in combat zones, he explained as he gently fitted it to Max's frame. It provides adjustable support while allowing the animal to gradually rebuild strength through normal movement patterns. Max observed the proceedings with patient dignity, his trust in Stevens having grown through their regular sessions. The former agent had become a frequent visitor to the Parker household, his expertise in canine rehabilitation proving invaluable to Max's recovery. But more importantly, his first-hand knowledge of what Max had endured during the warehouse raid provided a connection that seemed to resonate with the shepherd on a deep level. "Ready to try standing, partner?" Stevens asked Max, using the same respectful tone he would address a human colleague. With James supporting one side of the harness and Stevens the other, Max carefully shifted his weight forward. His injured leg trembled with the effort, but he managed to rise into a standing position, balancing primarily on his 3 healthy limbs while the harness provided auxiliary support to the healing leg. "Excellent," Stevens praised, monitoring the dog's posture closely. "He's distributing weight better today. The muscle tone is improving." Lily observed the procedure with intense focus, her analytical mind processing every detail of Max's recovery. "He's bearing 7% more weight on the injured leg than yesterday," she noted, her gift for pattern recognition allowing her to perceive subtle improvements others might miss. "That's exactly right," Stevens confirmed with a smile. "You've got a good eye, Lily." The front doorbell rang unexpectedly, causing Max to instinctively attempt to move toward the potential threat. James steadied him quickly, concerned about overexertion. "Easy, boy. I've got it." Sarah opened the door to reveal Chief Green and Michael Reynolds standing on the porch. The veteran looked markedly different from the desperate man James had first encountered just weeks ago. clean-shaven and clear-eyed, with his military bearing reasserting itself. That Reynolds stood tall despite the slight favoring of his left leg, a permanent reminder of his combat injuries. "Sorry to interrupt," Green said as they entered. "Michael wanted to check on Max before heading out." Reynolds approached the shepherd respectfully, maintaining a proper distance as he addressed James. "The VA approved my transfer to the residential treatment program in Capital City. I'll be leaving tomorrow morning." "That's excellent news," James replied, genuinely pleased. Reynolds' testimony against the Black Reapers had been instrumental in dismantling their operation, and his cooperation had resulted in a recommendation for rehabilitation rather than incarceration. "How long is the program?" "6 months," Reynolds answered. "Comprehensive treatment for PTSD and substance dependency, plus vocational training afterward." He hesitated before adding, "They've accepted my application for the Veteran Service Dog Training Apprenticeship. I'll be learning how to train dogs like Max to help other vets." At the sound of his name, Max studied Reynolds intently, seeming to assess the fundamental change in the man who had once stood with those threatening his family. After a moment's consideration, the shepherd relaxed his vigilant posture, offering what appeared to be approval of Reynolds' new path. "He remembers you helped us when it mattered most," Lily observed, her directness cutting through social pretense with characteristic precision. Reynolds nodded solemnly. "I made a lot of wrong choices, but that was one right one." As the afternoon progressed into evening, the Parker home filled with unexpected visitors. Dr. Wilson arrived to check Max's surgical site, pronouncing herself satisfied with the healing progression. Brian Taylor made a brief, uncomfortable appearance, his first step in making amends under his therapist's guidance, bringing a handcrafted wooden plaque commemorating Max's bravery, which James accepted with reserved grace. Most surprising was the arrival of Daniel Reeves' parents, elderly but dignified as they entered the home with reverent steps. Mrs. Reeves knelt beside Max with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "We had to come when we heard," she explained, her voice trembling as she gently touched the shepherd's head. "To think that after all this time, Danny's partner would still be protecting people." Mr. Reeves presented James with a weathered leather collar. This was what he wore as a puppy during his initial training with Danny. "We'd like him to have it again, a reminder of where he started and how far he's come." As twilight settled over Willow Creek, the visitors departed one by one, leaving the Parker family in peaceful solitude. Max, exhausted from the day's exertions and emotions, dozed on his specialized bed. Lily sat beside him, her homework spread across the floor as she worked with focused determination, one hand absently stroking the shepherd's fur. James and Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching their daughter and her protector with shared wonder at the bond between them. "Dr. Wilson thinks he might regain up to 80% function in that leg," Sarah said quietly, "with the right physical therapy and time." "And if he doesn't?" James asked, voicing the concern that had lingered since the attack. Sarah smiled, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Then he'll still be exactly what Lily needs and what we need. A family member who happens to have 4 legs instead of 2. Later that night, James woke to the subtle sound of movement in the hallway. Rising quietly to investigate, he found Lily's bed empty. A moment of parental panic subsided immediately when he spotted her curled up on the floor beside Max's bed, her small form rising and falling with deep, peaceful breaths. The shepherd lay awake, his vigilant gaze meeting James's in the dimness, a silent communication between two protectors sharing the same sacred duty. Rather than waking her, James simply brought a blanket from her room, gently draping it over his sleeping daughter. Max acknowledged this with the slightest tail wag, his eyes conveying what words could not. "I will watch over her always." As James returned to bed, he reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought a traumatized police dog into their lives and the profound ways Max had transformed their family. What had begun as an act of compassion saving a damaged animal from euthanasia had ultimately saved them all in ways none could have anticipated. In the quiet darkness of their home, now made whole again after weathering violence and nearly unbearable loss, James Parker understood a truth both simple and profound. Sometimes the deepest courage comes wrapped in fur or walking on 4 legs instead of 2, offering protection without condition and loyalty without limit. And in that silent communion between child and shepherd, there existed a bond that no malice could sever and no tragedy could diminish, a testament to the enduring power of trust freely given and faithfully honored. In the twilight of our years, we seek moments that affirm the deepest truths of our lives. This story of Max and Lily reminds us that courage wears many forms, sometimes appearing in the loyal eyes of a 4-legged guardian who stands between danger and those we love. Like Max, many of us carry invisible wounds from battles fought long ago, yet find purpose in protecting what matters most. The bond between this child and her shepherd echoes the connections that sustain us through life's darkest hours, connections that need no words to convey their depth and power. As we reflect on our own journeys, we recognize that true heroism often emerges not in perfect strength, but in the unwavering commitment to stand guard despite our injuries and limitations. May we all find a measure of Max's loyalty in our relationships and Lily's pure acceptance in how we view ourselves and others. For in the end, it is not the absence of scars that defines us, but the love we choose to give when standing, however imperfectly, to protect what we hold dear. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.